Aaron, thanks for doing this. I know you've been a madman on the circuit lately, right? Doing podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, time is of the essence. I've been focused on this technocracy and CBDC issue, and so there's certainly a lot to talk about in the news and coming out of Washington D.C.
I think this is one of the most important, if not the most important topic out there right now. And if you don't mind, just for people that aren't familiar with your work, doing a little bit of providing a description, be greatly appreciated.
Sure. So I'm currently a fellow at the Brownstone Institute, and my wife and I started the Daylight Freedom Foundation, which is a nonprofit that focuses on educating people about technocracy, helping people reclaim their autonomy and free will, and then building private solutions outside of the technocratic system and outside of the government system. But how I got into all of this is I started out life as a serial entrepreneur, dropped out of college when I was 19, started my first tech company. You learned a lot. I'd like to say I've been radicalized 3 times. The first time I was radicalized was when I realized that, Wall Street and the venture capital community is not about free markets. It's a complete crony system. So that was my first eye-opening experience. When I started my second company, which was in the healthcare space, it was a successful company in the wellness sector. We had clients in 43 states, profitable, and the company was destroyed by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and Attorney General Eric Holder. But I wasn't targeted. I don't think any of these people know who I am or knew what the company was about. We were just collateral damage from bad policy. So that was my second radicalization. And at that point, my view was, all right, well, we don't have free markets. We have cronyism. And then I viewed that as, well, the government is just completely incompetent, right? Because I was, the company was destroyed and people had no idea what the impacts were of their policies and everything else. And so after that happened, I moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project and became a full-on liberty activist. Became the chair of the Free State Project and ran a number of super PACs and political organizations trying to get people elected. My wife ran a group called New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, got over 100 people elected, a couple of different election cycles, and thought, the way we'll fix this is politically. I won't go into all. I even ran for office myself, ran for U.S. Senate and some other things. I won't go into all of it because that's a whole separate conversation, but came to realize that we're not going to be able to vote our way out. During this time, I was introduced to Bitcoin in 2012, and I learned about Bitcoin through the Free State Project, through a Free Stater named Ian Freeman, and through another guy named Roger Ver, and started using cryptocurrency for day-to-day transactions on a small scale, but as far back as 2012, because in New Hampshire, you have a huge population of liberty people, and people were, in fact, at one point, I don't know if it's still the case, New Hampshire had more per capita crypto transactions than anywhere in the world. At least that was the case in the early days. Decided to get out of politics, stopped using a personal bank account in 2019. So started moving to crypto, gold, and silver. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, we weren't surprised about COVID, to be honest, that like the fact that it would happen or any of the rest of it. My wife had was working on vaccine choice all the way back in 2008. So that part of it wasn't really the big shocker. What was the shocker was that I noticed that friends of mine were being targeted, particularly at the intersection of liberty and crypto, were being targeted by the federal government. I mean, in a very serious way. So we have Jeremy Kauffman, who started Library.io, which was a censorship-resistant version of YouTube, and he was targeted for 5 years by the SEC. Ian Freeman, who I mentioned, who I learned about Bitcoin through, he had a syndicated radio show called Free Talk Live, and he was heavily involved in ATMs and introducing merchants to point-of-sale systems for taking crypto, and was really pushing the use of cryptocurrency as an alternative to central bank and government currencies as a way to promote freedom and to promote peace. Well, he was also targeted in fact, he was raided by 5 different federal government departments at the same time, military, vehicles, Bearcats, the whole 9 yards, breaking into his thing, all for, essentially selling Bitcoin without a license, even though he had a license. He had an opinion letter from an attorney saying that he didn't even need a license. So I'm like, why are they spending all of this money and all of this time trying to shut down these particular types of people, because I mean, they're going way above and beyond in terms of they're looking for an excuse to shut them down. And that's when I discovered Biden's executive order 14067, which actually this all happened at around the same time, which was an executive order that authorized two things. It authorized the U.S. government to officially pursue a CBDC. And the joke behind that is they've been working on a CBDC since 2018 and already have 3 pilots. But this was the first time that there was an executive order and a stated public policy that this is the direction the U.S. government is going in. And then the other part of that executive order was a whole of government crackdown on crypto. And I mean whole of government, which we've experienced. Everything from the debanking that you've seen to the SEC targeting people to, you know, Ian and my friend Roger Ver, who's still facing 109 years in prison, and he's stuck in Spain awaiting extradition, which he's been fighting for over a year, which is a whole other conversation. If we have time, you know, we'll get into. But when I saw, this was before Roger, I mean, Ian was already, you know, he'd already gone through his trial and was now going into the sentencing phase of these things. And when I understood that the source of all of this was this executive order and that there was a complete coordinated effort to shut down the use of cryptocurrency to pave a way for CBDC, I thought, boy, I need to warn people. I literally dropped everything that I was doing, wrote a book called The Final Countdown, which basically the first half explains what's, you know, technocracy is, why CBDCs are happening, the fact that we've gone from 35 countries researching CBDCs in 2020 to 134 countries representing 98% of global GDP today working on CBDCs, over half of those beyond just the research phase. So the first of it, yeah, part of the book was educational. The back half was, you know, how to, you know, defeat it by stopping using the dollar and starting to use alternative currencies. So wrote the book, ran for president as a Republican because I'm in New Hampshire and because of the first in the nation primary here. And my goal was to elevate this to other political candidates and to try to get to the debate stage to raise awareness. That didn't happen. But Vivek Ramaswamy read my book. I had 3 conversations with him about it. And he's the one who recommended to Trump to come out against CBDCs the night before the primary in New Hampshire, because there's a huge vote block of liberty people and libertarians in New Hampshire for which that's a key issue. That's turned out to be a nightmare that backfired. But that's kind of the history of how I got to where I am today. And where we are today is, unfortunately, despite a lot of propaganda and a lot of rhetoric, technocracy and CBDC level surveillance is accelerating more during the first 6 months of Trump than it would have probably in 8 years under someone else, under even the Dems. And the problem is most people are unaware of it because they've just rebranded it and they've done a hell of a job with propaganda and messaging.
Is this what you anticipated would happen when he got reelected?
I did anticipate that he would push a technocratic agenda. I actually didn't realize that he would pick the strategy and I don't even, when I say him, it's not Trump doing this. It's actually the technocrats that are pushing this. It's the PayPal mafia. It's Peter Thiel, Musk, David Sachs. Trump didn't come up with these ideas, but I didn't even realize. I was caught off guard about how quickly they would implement this and the strategies that they would use. But I knew it would go in this direction. And so the problem that I have is, you know, we were doing workshops all over the country, 26 states, 3 different countries, and expanding out last year before the election, where people were really interested in learning about this topic. And it's just fallen off because people see that Trump rescinded Biden's executive order, put out an executive order saying, well, we're not going to have a CBDC. And so now people don't bother to go and dig into the issues of what these bills like the Genius Act and the Clarity Act say. And it's more technically difficult to understand the nuance of it. And so people are just not paying attention to it. They're distracted by whatever it is. It's going to be Epstein today. It's going to be, you know, the woke war tomorrow. I mean, whatever. We go from one little manufactured conflict to another. None of it ever gets resolved, but the technocracy is going on behind the scenes. I'll give you one example. So, you know, people were worried about if it's Klaus Schwab or the WEF talking about a digital ID. People are horrified by it. I even still see it today. Memes. Oh, well, digital ID is the gateway to all of this other stuff. They just passed Real ID. This is something that has been in the works since 2005. That's when that legislation was drafted, and that was as a part of a response to 9/11. It never was able to get implemented until under Trump. And there's been no backlash. And so Real ID is already digital in 8 states. People don't realize what's going on with Real ID. It's digital in 8 states, and there are already plans to expand that to all 50 states. So essentially, we've already passed a digital ID. We've just passed a backdoor CBDC through the Genius Act. The Clarity Act is actually going to apply this tracking, programmability, and censorship that we have now with stablecoins to stocks, bonds, and commodities, right? And we've added essentially Patriot Act 2.0 through the One Big Beautiful Bill, $150 billion worth of surveillance, AI, and militarization, further militarization of the police. And it's only July, right? So it's pretty, so I was not expecting it to go as quickly as it's gone. And I wasn't expecting the complete lack of resistance.
Yeah, and you also, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but ICE's budget had jumped from a small amount to I think quadrupling or even more in this new plan.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah,
the border's closed. Why the increase in their budget?
Well, I mean, who knows where the money is actually going to be spent, but part of that whole initiative, by the way, includes so not only are they increasing the budget, but a lot of that budget is going to AI surveillance and drones, right? So it's, okay, yeah, we're building the wall, right? We're finishing up the wall, but we're still going to need these other techniques. So now we need more sophisticated drones. And again, the problem that I have with this is people celebrate this, not realizing that every time stuff like this happens, those drones are coming for us next, right? They're not going to stop using this technology and only use it for this one particular use case. This is just furthering the overall capacity of the government for surveillance and pushing forward the development of AI. And people should be horrified, by the way, about Palantir as well. People got all hyped about Doge. This is something I was warning people about. Musk and even people that are libertarians and people that are supposed to be free markets. They often look at this as, well, Elon's the wealthiest guy in the world. He's a successful entrepreneur. He's just there to make government more efficient by applying technology. And that's not what the agenda is. It's actually an ideological movement of technocracy, which is essentially to change how society is managed. It's not one based on property rights or individual rights. It's one where elites pick scientists and engineers to make decisions from the top-down basis. And so people get confused by this. They confuse technocracy with technology, and they actually thought he was going to save $2 trillion through Doge. And all we actually really got out of that was an API that connected Palantir to all of Americans' tax information, and which is now going to the next stage. And Palantir is going to be connecting to all of the federal government databases and bringing in that data, which of course will then connect to our Real ID. So it's very frustrating to watch how successful they've been at doing this. And Musk has been the king of propaganda on this, because now he's launched this America Party, which when you read what it says it's about, the top 2 things are about AI. The first bullet point is the application of AI to the military. What could go wrong there? And then the application of AI to make government more efficient. Those are the first 2 items. This is the very heart of technocracy. And people are like, oh, they're going to save money, right? And that's just not. There's an ideological agenda here that if you don't understand that there's that ideological agenda, you'll miss the point entirely. And that's where we are today.
Well, I also think as well, and I'm assuming this made it into the Big Beautiful Bill in the final version of it, but AI is going to be federally regulated for the next 10 years. They're centralizing everything. People have no idea what's really going on. And this is one of the things that, I didn't know it was going to play out quite like this, but when he got put back in, and I believe the people wanted him to get reelected, but I also think that the technocrats, tech bros, stopped the other side from cheating this time like they did in 2020. I don't care what anybody says. In my heart of hearts, that's what I think occurred. Could be wrong, but now you're seeing, because it benefited them to take over MAGA rather than to fight it anymore. And so they've now, to your point, putting in these instruments, AI cannot be regulated on the state level for the next 10 years. People aren't talking about that. Like, to me, that's a big deal. How about the Department of Defense that literally bought a stake in Grok?
Yep. Well, I think they did end up taking out the state level regulation portion of this, but I'm sure they'll figure out a different way to introduce it or another way to backdoor it. So I have no doubt that, they're not going to, and they're going to do it on the basis of national security and national defense. And we have to compete with China, which, by the way, I just interviewed Mike Adams, the health ranger. And if you haven't followed him, he's actually just created an AI called Enoch, which is trained on a completely different set of data. It's trained on, the information he's been collecting, a lot of alternative health information and everything else. And he's very, very knowledgeable about AI. And he's claimed for the race for AGI, the U.S. has already lost because the amount of power that's going to be required to do this, China already has it. And even if we were able to ramp up, or even if we had the intention to ramp up, we don't have the capacity to ramp up before China wins the AGI battle. People do not understand how far advanced China is. People, maybe even Trump. Trump seems to have like this 1980s view. I remember growing up. I mean, we were talking about this at the beginning. I remember being told, well, you better finish your plate because there are, children starving in China. This was always one of the justifications to eat all of your food. And so some people still have this idea that China is this like backwater where, the kids are eating dirt and starving or whatever. And they have better electric cars. They're more advanced on better drone technology. There's just a massive disconnect. Not that I think that there's even a US versus China battle. I think it's all one technocracy and China's kind of the leading player in that, but yeah, no, they are going to use and they can always use national security to bypass the Constitution and to cram things through an emergency. It works every single time.
Well, and so I was in Virginia recently, right outside of DC, and started randomly talking to a guy who worked for AWS, and he was saying how they're building these data centers everywhere, all over the place, and they can't build them fast enough. So you saying that, they're trying to catch up. So you're saying at this point, there's no way to catch China, or China's too far ahead?
I'm saying that the limiting factor here, and I've actually talked to Chris Martenson quite a bit about this, and he at Peak Prosperity, and this is his big issue is about, energy and peak oil and everything else. And what he says is, and he's been tracking this for a while, what's about to happen is because of our grid sucks. So the limiting factor in all of this, as these companies are looking to build more and more data centers, is they're going to run out of electricity. So what we can expect as citizens is a surge in the price of electricity. That is absolutely coming. That's going to be a consequence of this. But even still, so what's the breaking point here? If your electricity bill goes up 3x, well, the people aren't going to really stand for that. And we don't have enough capacity. I mean, our grid hasn't been updated in a long time. So relative to what China has, even if you started today and said, we're going to build the grid, again, they've already got it. And so as you can see with the way the AI wars are heating up, I mean, these models, it's like every other week, somebody's updating their model, and this stuff is progressing closer. So, I mean, if it takes us an extra 3 years to build out or 5 years to build out our electrical grid, we've already lost. So I think that the general theory here is whoever gets to AGI first wins, and it's almost checkmate based on our electrical grid.
Well, do you also, I don't know if you follow Matt Smith or Doug Casey over at Crisis Investing. And Matt I have on here quite a bit. And he actually just published a Substack yesterday, DARPA's Theory of Mind Warfare. And, talking about Palantir and, the long, what they're attempting to do. And also to tie it in, this kind of goes outside the article a bit, but tying into Palantir and then the financial instruments to create the CBDC or stablecoin control grid. But they're moving us into, this is a global monetary reset, what's happening. This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffeeandamike.
Yes, and the end game, so that just, and I really encourage people, if you're not familiar with Technocracy, I'm going to be putting out a lot of content on this, but the OG on this is a guy by the name of Patrick Wood, and I believe it's technocracy.news. For 4 decades, this guy has been talking about this concept. And so when I talk about technocracy, it's not just a generic term. It was a movement that started in the 30s. And you can see these pictures of these people having meetings. They'd all wear, I mean, it almost looks like kind of a Nazi rally, but they're all wearing suits. They're all like wearing the same suits, men and women. There's women's suits, there's men's suit, and they're all wearing gray suits, to the point where GM actually made a Technocracy gray shade for cars. And so this was a big movement. And the purpose of the movement, as I said, it's not only to have scientists and engineers make decisions, but the fundamental principle is they want to switch the global economy from being a price-based system to an energy credit-based system. This has been a design since the 1930s. They haven't had the capacity to do it. Imagine coming up with this idea in the 1930s, pre-internet, pre-digital currencies and so forth. But the way I like to describe what the end game looks like is, imagine one global currency that's tied to energy credits, and then the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals are basically the elements of a social credit system where all of your actions are measured based on this, and the punishments and incentives are all tied to this energy credit based closed system. That is the ultimate direction that they're going towards, and they're actually making huge progress with this, because again, like I said, with the stable coins, I would argue they've already captured the stable coins. I mean, the stable coins, USDC and Tether they're already working with law enforcement anyway, even before this bill. So Tether and USDC can be frozen and certainly tracked. And so this is already the case. Now it's just put under more control. And now you have the EU, in response to the US doing this backdoor stablecoin, they're accelerating their CBDC. They may have their CBDC as soon as October of this year. There are 11 countries that have already launched a CBDC. So what we have right now is a global arms race where everybody's competing to see who's going to own what percentage of global digital programmable money. None of this is good for us, and all of this is good for kind of moving in this general area of technocracy.
Explain to me like I'm 5, Aaron, to the Genius Act and the stable coins and what that means for regular people that are trying to understand it and get a grasp on it, but just can't. And that includes myself, really, more me, I'm the one that can't grasp this. Like so if you can, the best you can to explain it like I'm 5.
Let me take a step back before I even go there, because I wrote this tweet and it went absolutely viral, which surprisingly, I said, I actually think Americans might be the most brainwashed people on the planet. And it got a huge response. And I'll say this only because what I mean by that is the delta between what we think we are versus what we actually are is incredible, because you'll have people, we're the freest country in the world, freest speech and everything else. When you look at any of the objective measures, the only thing the U.S. is number one in, it's 2 areas: incarceration rate and military spending. We're 24th for economic freedom. We're not even in the top 10 for freedom of speech and everything else. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is because it relates to this entire conversation about CBDCs and stablecoins. So I want to start by saying our money is already almost entirely digital. It's already programmable, it's already trackable, and it's already censorable. So people don't actually think about this. So somebody will say, well, we don't want to become like communist China with their digital currency. And the truth is we're already there. And let me explain. So the way money is created is the federal government issues an IOU, Congress issues an IOU to the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is a private cartel of banks. And the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air backed by those IOUs, but it doesn't print money like the Treasury. This isn't minting coins or printing dollars. They create an account for the federal government in an Oracle database. So when the government's writing checks for all of the goods and services and everything else, for the wars and everything else that we're doing all around the world, those checks are being written out of an Oracle database at the Federal Reserve. Now, by definition, that is a central bank digital currency. We also have your local bank. They create money out of thin air as well, and they have a database, which is typically a Microsoft database or an Oracle database, and it's backed by the reserves that they have in the Oracle database at the Federal Reserve. So this entire system and the entire creation of money is digital, and people aren't aware of that. And I wasn't really aware of a lot of these technical details actually when I started this either. So my evolution with this was, I found out, oh, hey, all of these countries are looking to build CBDCs. And then the more I look into it, I'm like, wait a minute, we already have a CBDC. And so I spent a lot of time trying to understand and put these pieces together. There's already 13 different programs involved in tracking our financial transactions today in the United States. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to go through some of the big ones. So today, the IRS can already get access to your transaction information and use AI to analyze your transaction information. This is not something that the Federal Reserve is responsible for. This is, if you read the terms and service of your bank agreement, it says they can cancel your account without cause. They can change the terms and conditions without your consent. They can sell or share your information, and they can change the fees. This is what all of the big bank contracts say. In fact, I encourage you now, one of the benefits of AI is you can actually take these lengthy click wrap agreements, the things you scroll through for pages and pages and pages, no one reads, and you just click accept. It's horrifying if you look at what these things say. So we've already given the IRS the ability to look at our transactions. We have something called the Bank Secrecy Act, which was passed in 1970. And this is basically allegedly to stop money laundering, which it doesn't do. But what it does is it requires the bank to collect all of this information about the customers. Now, increasingly like biometric information, your ID. When you go in to create a bank account, they'll ask you all of these questions. Oh, what do you like to do? What are your favorite activities? What do you do for work? They're not actually asking you that because they want to build a relationship. They actually have to collect this information on forms based on a law passed by Congress. We then have the Patriot Act and the CARES Act, which added some additional financial surveillance, but there are a couple of other things that I want to talk about. There's NSA bulk data collection on financial transactions, which is completely illegal and shouldn't happen at all, but does happen. And you can check with Snowden on that. There's something called a suspicious activity report. So you may not know this, but if you do a transaction with a bank greater than $10,000, a report is automatically sent to the Treasury Department. But here's the kicker. About 2 months ago, the Trump administration, in their supposed efforts to crack down on illegal immigration, had the Treasury Department issue a memo that says for 30 zip codes in California and Texas, we're reducing that threshold from $10,000 to $200. So now if you're in one of those 30 zip codes, every transaction that you do more than $200, a report is automatically sent to the Treasury Department. No bill was created. No, Congress didn't need to get involved. No new technology was needed. Our system is already digital, and the ability to report that information in that capacity already exists and is actively being used. So even if you believe in the idea that this should be used to try to stop illegal immigration, maybe the next administration comes in and they say, well, we don't like, your speech. So anybody that, here's a list of people, they could change the criteria to whatever they want the criteria to be. And the important thing to know is it's already digital and the reporting already exists. Our money is already programmable. So if anybody has a health savings account, what is a health savings account? A health savings account is an account where, and it gets sold as a free market solution, by the way. This is where you get to take a maximum percentage of your own money and put it into a bank account on a pre-tax basis and spend it on healthcare services that are predetermined by the government and your healthcare plan, right? So they tell you what you can and cannot buy with a subset of your own pre-tax dollars, but it uses a debit card tied to a bank. It's programmable money. If you want to, and the programmability can be, you can only use Walgreens versus CVS. You can only buy this kind of product or that kind of product. That exists today. This is digital programmable money within the existing system. Food stamps, EBT cards. These are digital programmable cards issued at a state basis. So when RFK comes out and says, we're going to stop food stamps, people from being able to use food stamps to buy sugary drinks, and everybody's all that excited about it. Oh, yay. Well, what's actually going on behind the scenes? They're programming the money so that now your EBT card can only work with a narrower set of products. It's adding more programmability into digital money, and people are cheering this on. As far as censorship goes, we've had Operation Choke Point 1.0 that happened under Obama. This is where you had everything from payday lenders to people that ran gun shops and a whole bunch of different categories of businesses that were essentially debanked. So that was Congress. Then we had, in recent days, we've had everybody from Dr. Joseph Mercola to the Trump family to Kanye West to Nick Fuentes and others debanked. Well, here's the thing. The debanking didn't come from the Federal Reserve. That didn't come from Congress. Those were the woke policies implemented at the level of the bank. So Bank of America, JP Morgan, all these companies are WEF partner companies and everything else. And so they actually decided, and because of the terms of service, they can cancel anybody's account without cause. They're able to do that. So I'm giving you this setup so that people understand that the thing that you are afraid of, the thing that you think that you don't want to have happen in terms of having money that can be programmed and tracked and censored by either the government or the central bank or whoever you think the bad guy is, it already exists today, and you're just not aware of it, or it hasn't hit you yet. I mean, I certainly know a lot of people, myself included, that have been debanked, where a lot of us have known this for a long time, but it can happen to anyone. The tech and the laws are already there. So with that as the kind of the backdrop for this, what's going on is with the Genius Act is what the administration has done and what Congress has managed to do is to convince people that what they should be afraid of is the central bank issuing the digital currency, that the Federal Reserve is the bad guy, that the Federal Reserve is somehow going to go out on their own and create a digital currency that can be programmed and tracked and censored. And so they've made the Federal Reserve out to be the bad guy, and Trump has signed he first signed an executive order saying we're not going to have a CBDC. And then they passed the Genius Act, which takes stable coins, and stable coins they're privately issued digital currencies where one digital token equals $1. So the idea behind this is most things are priced in dollars. And globally, the dollar is still the global reserve currency, but it's difficult to use and sign up for bank accounts. It's really expensive to do cross-border transactions. If you're in a different country and you want dollars, in some cases you can't get them at all, or you can't even get access to a bank account. So private companies came up with the idea of creating stablecoins so that you now get the stability of being able to price things in dollars, but you get all of the convenience of crypto in terms of speed and transaction costs and so on and so forth. And so these things have become incredibly popular. Last year, there was $27 trillion worth of transactions done using Tether and USD or USDC and whatever some of the other coins. That's more transaction volume than Visa. So what the propaganda campaign has been, we're not going to do a CBDC, but what they've done is they've taken these popular stable coins and put it under the control of Congress and put it under control of the Federal Reserve. So now all of the anti-money laundering laws and know your customer laws, those now will apply to a previously private solution, these stable coins. So essentially they've captured a private solution, and then they've applied all this other financial surveillance to this private solution. So what you're getting is the financial surveillance you were worried about with CBDCs, you're getting that anyway. It's just that now they're capturing something that's already popular and that people already use. So that's one component of the Genius Act. The next component of the Genius Act is one of the reasons that they're doing this is no one wants to buy U.S. debt. And we've just passed this one big, beautiful bill that adds $2.5 trillion a year. And so how are they going to raise that money? China has said ditch the dollar. Japan's not in a position. And these two are the largest purchasers of U.S. treasuries. Well, what they've said is if you're going to issue a stable coin, you now have to back the stable coin one-to-one by only U.S. treasuries and only U.S. dollars. And our Treasury Secretary has said they think they're going to be able to sell at least $2 trillion worth of treasuries. In other words, add $2 trillion to the debt and fund these big deficits by capturing stablecoins and using the stablecoin hype. And so at the end, what we get with the Genius Act is the terrible financial surveillance that we already have with the existing banking system applied to a popular digital solution. And we get a backdoor way for them to fund these trillions of dollars worth of debt and expansion of government and expansion of runaway spending. I don't know if that was at a fifth grade level, but I did want to at least kind of break up the pieces because this is the challenge with this is that people don't understand how bad the current situation is and that this is just an extension. And the best way that I like to say this now is now we have a CBDC, which is a Congress-backed digital currency. And we shouldn't buy into I hate the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve shouldn't exist, but all of the financial surveillance comes from the government. All of it. All of it comes from Congress. The Patriot Act, all of this stuff comes from Congress. The Federal Reserve was never a threat. The Federal Reserve was never going to create a CBDC on their own. They can't. It's unconstitutional, but it's also not in their own interest. The Federal Reserve has not been excited about the financial surveillance that's been added since 1970 because it makes their job more difficult and it adds to compliance costs. There's nothing in it for the Federal Reserve to have all of this financial surveillance. It's a compliance issue. So people have been tricked into putting their eye on the ball saying, oh, well, now we're not going to have a central bank digital currency. Yeah, no, now you're going to have the same people that are surveilling you already and censoring you and the people in Congress that pass bills and emergencies that strip away our rights. Those are the people that now have power over something that was designed to be decentralized and not require governments or third parties or banks to begin with, which is the whole point of why Bitcoin was created and the genesis of crypto in the first place.
So in your view, then, are they attempting to do away with the Federal Reserve and then privatizing it, or what is their role going forward for this new monetary reset that they're attempting to do?
I mean, the ending monetary reset ends up being a global digital currency backed by energy credits. So this isn't even like all of this is theater. And again, the people pushing this are the technocrats, not even the politicians. I can tell you, having listened to the House discussion and everything else, the people that voted on this didn't read the bill. Even the sponsor didn't write the bill, and they don't understand what all of this is about. This is technocrats pushing an agenda behind the scenes that's been going on since the 1930s. As to whether they're trying to abolish the Federal Reserve, I don't think the Federal Reserve is always intended to be temporary. I mean, even at the time when it was created, it was kind of understood this as a stopgap measure. But I will tell you, the only thing worse than the Federal Reserve is if you got rid of the Federal Reserve and you had Congress issuing money directly. I spoke at a conference in Dallas in 2023, a crypto conference. I was on a CBDC panel, and then afterwards there was a government panel talking about CBDCs. And I was scratching my head. I'm like, why is this guy Ron Wyden there? He's a real liberal Democrat from Oregon. And why is he out speaking against CBDCs? I thought that the Dems liked CBDCs. Well, he was speaking against it because he thought that Congress should directly have the ability to program money and directly control the money and be able so that they could then pass laws at the level of Congress and not have to go through the Federal Reserve. You could just implement it directly without a third party. So while the Federal Reserve is not the good guy, what I've been advocating for is that we have to separate money and state altogether. We shouldn't have the Federal Reserve issuing money. We shouldn't have Congress issuing money. And my evidence for this is that no fiat currency in human history has ever succeeded. We've had thousands of government-issued currencies where it's backed by IOUs and debt, and it's never worked. The average fiat currency only lasts 27 years. And they fail for very predictable reasons, which you can probably imagine: corruption, economic mismanagement, war, competition from other currencies, technology, so on and so forth. And so if insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, using fiat currency is insane. And it's something that we shouldn't keep on doing, because people will sit here and say, well, yeah, the dollar's going to collapse and then BRICS is going to emerge. Great. Then the BRICS will emerge and then that'll collapse. Fiat currency is kind of the source of the boom and bust of nation states. And it's predictable. Even something that's the global reserve currency like the dollar, if you look at the 5 previous global reserve currencies, they only lasted 84 years each. We're already kind of beyond that. And so, but if most of us, in fact, almost everyone living at this point, the dollar's been the global reserve currency and no one's ever even thought to question it. They've never even entertained the idea that the dollar wouldn't be the global reserve currency, or that the dollar could fail, even though historically there's 100% chance that that's going to happen. And there's nothing that we're doing from a policy perspective. It's not like we have a more ethical or more financially restrained government. If anything, at this point, I think we're at the late stage of this and people know it, which is why we're doing, one Ponzi after another, a Bitcoin strategic reserve. We're going to get out of $37 trillion worth of debt by buying and holding an asset. Sure, that's going to work. We're going to use the, government to capture these stable coins, and that's going to preserve dollar dominance. Literally, the strategy that's going on here is they know that if you actually look at what's going on in the economy, whether it's the housing market, the stock market, everything is overvalued. We're kind of like at a bubble for every single asset class, auto loans, whatever it happens to be. And they know it's going to pop. So they're hoping that if they can kick the can and buy more time through stablecoin hype or whatever it is, then really the Hail Mary is that AI will come in and create such productivity enhancements that we will be able to grow our way out. This is literally the last shot. This is the last gasp. So while they're putting out propaganda saying, it's the golden age and, we're going to dominate with this and, all great days ahead, behind the scenes, knowingly, they know this is kind of a desperate Hail Mary.
Trump touts, how great things are going, but yet he wants Powell to keep dropping interest rates.
Exactly. Right. I mean, again, the debt is where the debt is. And then if you look at some of these, look at housing. I mean, housing is, what did I see? The average age of a home buyer now is 56. I mean, you look at this stuff on generation, ask a millennial how it's going, how the economy's going. I mean, if you're a boomer, it's okay. But even then, you look at these bills and they're giving kind of preferential, no tax on Social Security. They're giving more benefits to boomers. This is why in New York City, you have a socialist that's kind of leading in the mayoral race because younger people have just given up on the prospect of, the American dream, which, I would argue was a psyop to begin with. But the things that people have been buying into don't apply to the younger generations based on these structural problems with the economy.
Yeah, I every time I criticize boomers, I get some type of hate email or hate message for it, and let me preface this, say it a little bit different way for people that are regular listeners of mine. It's not all boomers, and I don't blame them. They grew up in a better time in terms of lower interest rates. Things were not as expensive. College wasn't as expensive. You graduated, you found a job in your field, making more money than the amount of debt you had, if you had any debt at all. It's not their fault. It's not their fault at all. But the younger generation, they are in such a hole now, and the boomers are always like, well, it was tough during my time. Yeah, there's always tough periods, but it's not the same. You can't compare the two. Because these younger people, a regular college is over $30,000 a year.
Yeah, it's not even remotely comparable. I mean, you see all these jokes like, boomer bought a house for $2,000 and, one job and you could have a family with 4 kids and send them to college and the wife stayed at home and everything else. And this is largely a function of fiat currency. If you actually look at the dollar's lost 99% of its purchasing power since 1913, it's actually lost 11% this year. It's lost 26% just since COVID. Right. I mean, this is incredibly problematic because this kind of loss in purchasing power is essentially a tax. And now we're in this untenable situation that does break somewhat by generational lines. But I'm not trying to even make this a generational thing, because the real battle here is technocracy versus freedom. And that's actually the big war. So it's not about Republican versus Democrat or boomer versus millennial or whatever it happens to be. Those are the divisions that they like us to participate in, while they continue to add more surveillance systems and the digital control over all of our assets. And that has been happening at an alarming rate. When I first wrote my book and when I first ran for president, people were like, "You're nuts." Like, people, like, because no one was talking about this. Like, I was talking to people in the crypto community that are like, weren't paying attention to this. They weren't paying attention to what was going on with CBDCs. People in crypto are worried about their own individual projects and not seeing what governments and central banks and traditional banks are doing. They've only been comparing themselves amongst their, fellow crypto projects. And, when I pointed this out, people are like, "Oh, is this actually true?" And now here we are, where, every other week, it seems now, they're passing some piece of legislation that is centralizing control over everything, not only digital assets, but, as you mentioned, AI. And I'm not anti-tech. I mean, I've been using computers since I was 5, and I started out as a tech. I mean, I'm actually using cutting-edge privacy coins and everything else. But technology has a freedom component aspect to it, or a tyranny aspect to it. And you can have crypto and AI that is decentralized, that you have in your own custody, that isn't censored by third parties, or you can have this complete dystopian system. And what I'm trying to say is the dystopian system is winning. And it's winning at an accelerating pace. So even the people that are working on the decentralized solutions might be, well, hey, we're making progress. We've gotten, this adoption. They're measuring the adoption, again, relative to themselves, not relative to what's going on centrally with the technocrats. And in that area, we're losing in a big way.
Just this week alone, I saw a report from Reuters a few days ago that at the White House, leaders of healthcare, they didn't say who though, so you take this for what it is, but they're going to be meeting at the White House to talk about more process and workflows so it's easier to share data, patient data.
Yep. Yeah, and I've been in a lot of conversations about this as well. I'm at the point where I don't want to sound too tinfoil hat, but I mean, I've spent time in the healthcare sector. We have fundamental problems with centralized medicine. I mean, even down to the level of that we even have this allopathic approach, and that we have, doctors that are only pursuing one methodology. Even random clinical trials are that's like Newtonian physics, and we know more about quantum physics. We don't live in a deterministic world. We live in a probabilistic world. So even the entire way that we evaluate whether drugs or other interventions are effective, I'd argue is based on science, that's a scientific worldview that's hundreds of years old, that's been updated. And there's no way to fix that. So everybody's working on, well, we're going to hold all of these things. We're going to hold peer-reviewed science, which turns out is not, can't be reconfirmed 99% of the time. Based on random controlled we're going to keep all of that, steady as our mechanisms for evaluating things, and then we're going to add more and more centralization to the government when we should be completely decentralizing medicine. And this is a big issue with a lot of the people that were excited about RFK. Well, I like the concept of medical freedom. Medical freedom is not when you get in control of government using the force of the state to push your particular viewpoint on healthcare. That's actually not medical freedom. Medical freedom is removing the government's involvement altogether so that people can explore multiple modalities. And that's not what's happening. Even what is RFK talking about doing now? He's talking about wearables. And to your point, there's now these discussions about bringing in AI. And, he's proposed a Surgeon General, Casey Means, who runs a wearable company that has a blood glucose monitor, continuous blood glucose monitor, which the irony of this is the monitor itself generates EMF, which actually increases your blood glucose. I mean, this is essentially, so replacing or trying to take some of big pharma and replace it with Silicon Valley tech isn't the big flex or win that people think that it is. And it's just more consolidation of and control over your health by the federal government, which is the wrong way to go.
And also, her brother Callie means, right, his affiliation with TrueMed,
Yep.
using your HSA to buy cold plunges and cryo and.
So that's what I was saying about, so HSAs being, what are HSAs? They're digital programmable money. People sit here and say, well, China, we don't want to become like China in their social credit system, right? This is always, when I watched the House debate the Genius Act, kind of like, you remember when COVID, anytime a member of Congress got COVID, they would all send out the same template email. It said, well, I've just been diagnosed with a positive diagnosis for COVID, but because I took my shot and my booster, I'm going to have reduced symptoms, right? There was like copy pasta for that. Well, they have the same thing, at least the Republicans did, on this Genius Act. And it was, we don't want to become like communist China, and we don't want, we want to make sure that we protect the freedom and don't have the financial surveillance that they have in China. And then they point to the Chinese social credit system. So yeah, China has a pretty robust, it's on a province by province basis, but they have a huge amount of AI surveillance, and they can track everything. Whether you go in and out of the town, they can actually look at what you considered putting in your shopping cart. You may have put in 2 bottles of vodka and then put one back. They can even track in-game cheating in video games and tie that to your social credit system. And the consequences of this are huge. If your social credit system, they usually have different tiers and categories, and if it drops, it determines where you can live and what kind of job you can have, even the speed of your internet access. And so people sit here and say, oh, this is horrible. I'm like, okay, we have a social credit system. It is the 75,000 page, 16 million word tax code. What is the tax code? It is a system of penalties and incentives. The only difference between the United States and China is we don't have an app. We don't have any transparency. No one can possibly read all of the tax code. Even tax professionals have a hard time keeping up with the changes in the tax code. And if we're wrong, we go to prison. So they've got a system where everything's tracked. At least they have transparency, but we're sitting here saying we don't want to become like them, not realizing that we've already in many ways got it worse because the government is directing. You don't think the government through tax policy is directing energy policy or directing how you can invest your money? Even the fact people have bought into the idea of 401ks and IRAs and all this other stuff, what you can even invest your money into. You have people taking jobs that they don't want to get health care that probably doesn't help them. Well, why is that? That's because of tax policy coming out of World War II. So we're sitting here with our behavior largely being governed by Congress through the IRS, and we're sitting here saying that we don't have a social credit system. And so you're right. And so Callie means is what? He's pushing HSA. And so now it sounds great, right? Because if you're a medical freedom person, you're like, one of the things I don't like about HSAs is I can't buy cold plunges, or I can't buy this, or I can't buy that. And so now it looks like it's this big win because, you're adding some of these alternative approaches. The problem is everybody is conceding to the original idea, which is the government should be able to use tax policy to determine what percentage of your money you can use on a pre-tax basis for any kind of predefined list of healthcare services. You should be able to use your own money however you want on healthcare services without any of these third parties. And so what's going on now under RFK and under the so-called health freedom movement is they're actually giving the federal government more control. And even if you agree with the cold plunge today, you might not agree with, EBT cards can't be used to buy Coke, today, but you'll be forced to buy insect protein tomorrow. And nothing's being done to remove the centralization in the role of government. It's actually, even within RFK, it's being accelerated.
Yeah, people that were holding their, having hope that Kennedy was going to get in there and make an impact and bring down all of these, big pharma and give medical freedom back to the individuals. I don't know. It was one thing after the election. I said, none of this is going to happen.
No, I thought none of it was going to happen. But again, I think where I was surprised was by how quickly technocracy has seeped in even to that, because I wasn't recalling in RFK's speeches when he decided to support Trump and everything, I don't remember him talking about bringing in Silicon Valley and bringing in AI. That wasn't one of his talking points. He was talking about, we're going to make America healthy again by, cleaning up some of the poisons and everything else and finding out what some of the root causes of this are. But I didn't hear him playing up we're going to use the force of the state to add more AI and add wearables. That was not part of his messaging at all. And so that's why I'm looking at this. I'm like, this whole thing is absurd, how quickly all of this tracking and surveillance is coming in across the board, across all of the federal departments, and then being further centralized and further consolidated. It's just a horrible idea. And people got so caught up into their white knights, syndrome or whatever, thinking that these guys were going to fix everything, that they're not doing any due diligence. They're not asking any serious questions. And they're not even thinking about, well, what's going to happen if somebody I don't like wins an election? It's like almost like this belief that, Trump's going to be here forever. RFK is going to be here forever. There's never going to be an election that goes the other way. No forward thinking at all about what this means in terms of freedom and centralization.
So do you see then the debt being inflated away then with these stable coins and the companies like Tether and others that are going to have to buy it up?
Well, they're going to have to buy it up. My theory is that what's going to end up happening is because of the regulatory burden of the Genius Act, that Tether and USDC will probably end up being acquired by large U.S. banks. And so what we're going to end up with is a small number of stable coins that are essentially controlled by the large banks. And by the way, the same large banks who probably own the majority of the Federal Reserve. But nevertheless, it will still be used to sell treasuries it doesn't matter whether it's Tether or USDC. I'll give you an example. And by the way, I'm not necessarily even a huge fan of these things. I've been kind of, before this, I was saying to people there are problems with even the stable coins because let's go back to the original idea behind Bitcoin. The original idea was Bitcoin was launched after the 2008 financial collapse, kind of, I would argue, in response to what happened with the financial crisis. And the idea was it was supposed to be peer-to-peer cash that you could use to do day-to-day transactions without a central bank, without a commercial bank, and without governments. It was literally peer-to-peer cash. Stable coins, even before this legislation, well, what is it? It's a digital token that represents fiat currency. Well, fiat currency is the original problem that you're trying to figure out how to fix. Well, now you have a token that represents that. And that token may not even be backed by fiat itself. You have you have like 15 different layers of risk. So you've taken the fiat currency, which is bad. You've added a whole bunch of risk, and now you've made it programmable and trackable. So I wasn't a huge fan of stable coins to begin with, but I'm especially not a fan of the fact that they've been taken, something that's been a private solution is now essentially under the control of Congress and the Federal Reserve. But to this point, so Tether's never actually passed an audit. So Tether, I believe the market cap, there's $150 billion worth of Tether in circulation. And throughout the history of Tether, they've never passed an audit, and they've never been able to get an audit done. And twice they've been found guilty, I believe, of not having the reserves to back up the Tether. Once by the state of New York and another by the CFTC. Now, today, they still haven't passed an audit. But if you want to talk about how corrupt and crony this gets, the last investor in Tether, the last company to invest in Tether, was a company called Cantor Fitzgerald. They invested $600 million in Tether. And this is a financial services firm based out of New York that is also managing the treasuries that back, or at least partially back, Tether. Cantor Fitzgerald's, the owner, the former CEO, but the guy who owns Cantor Fitzgerald is Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary under Trump.
Gee, what a coincidence, huh?
What a coincidence. And so this is basically what we have. They've never passed an audit, but basically we have a trust me, bro statement from Howard Lutnick who said, oh, trust me, Tether has the reserves. But to this point, Tether, their CEO spoke at a recent Bitcoin conference, and he said, well, we have 100,000 Bitcoin and I can't remember how many tons of gold that are in part backing these Tether. Because remember, the whole point is one Tether equals $1, but it doesn't have to be backed by $1. It just needs to be backed by some combination of assets so that that the token is actually backed by something. It doesn't have to be dollars. Well, in this case, if it is backed by Bitcoin and it's backed by gold, they're going to have to, and not by treasuries, they're going to have to sell some of the gold and sell some of the Bitcoin to buy US treasuries and buy dollars to be compliant. So I think what happens out of this legislation was announced that the four largest banks in the US, Citi, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, announced that they as a group are going to issue a stablecoin. I believe Citi and Wells Fargo have announced, maybe all of them at this point have announced that they're going to individually launch a stablecoin. But my guess is that because of the regulatory burden, I wouldn't be surprised if that group of four banks ends up acquiring Tether and one of the other banks ends up buying USDC. So again, we end up in a situation where it's all the same players, controlling this. But yeah, it's still going to be used as a way to sell treasuries, even if it's captive by one of the large banks.
And so do you see a consolidation in banks then where it'll come down to maybe four or five and then some of the regional and small ones will just go away? Or how do you see that?
I think that's been happening anyway. I think that by law, I believe that no one bank is supposed to have more than 10% of all U.S. customer deposits, and J.P. Morgan Chase has already exceeded that. I thought they were already at something like 12% and maybe growing. So you are seeing a massive consolidation in banks, and you are seeing at the same time banks shutting down branches, and you're starting to see, I believe, I got to check the stats on this, but you may even be seeing a reduction in the number of ATMs and everything else. But I think that that's inevitable because all of this regulatory stuff. And again, one thing that I forgot to mention, one part of the Genius Act, I believe, and I got to double check to see if this passed in the final language, was if the bank goes under, if the bank goes bankrupt, then the stablecoin holders actually get paid before regular depositors. So this is already one more step towards incentivizing and penalizing people to move away from the current system towards stablecoins. So this is all a big move towards more and more adoption of stablecoins that are, again, regulated by Congress and the Federal Reserve. So yeah, you're going to see consolidation, and it's all the same people, and they've been able to use this. The Federal Reserve's the bad guy, and we stop CBDCs, and that's great, and that has nothing to do with financial surveillance. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I talked to Ted Cruz, who put in a bill an anti-CBDC bill. He put it in 2 years in a row, and I asked him about it. He's like, yeah, again, I'm worried about the Federal Reserve preemptively issuing a central bank digital currency. That was never going to happen. No one was actually working on doing this. It's all a show. Meanwhile, Cruz has actually voted on or reauthorized aspects of the Patriot Act that add financial surveillance to Americans. So the amount of propaganda is massive, but people are so non-critical of the Trump administration, and they've given up so much of their agency on just this general idea that these white knights are going to save things, that they're just not even asking questions, and they're buying the propaganda. I always like to say, a bill through Congress usually means the exact opposite of what the title says, right? I mean, the Patriot Act, how is it, and you can go through and you can look at this, and this is definitely the case with these crypto bills. And so then they passed an anti-CBDC surveillance act as part of this whole thing. And so people are like, oh, see, yeah, now the Federal Reserve is not going to be able to track this. This is just something that more fortifies the ability for Congress to basically steal these private stablecoins through legislation and to hold them captive. It's very frustrating to watch because as even we're talking about this, that it's technical. There's not a real simple way to describe this because you have to first understand how the current system works, and then you have to understand the difference between a CBDC and a stablecoin, and then you have to understand the role of the central bank versus Congress versus the executive branch versus commercial banks in surveillance overall. And so there's a lot that needs to be unpacked, or otherwise, what I found is people, they don't believe it. If you just give them like the 5-second tour of it, they don't believe it because they don't necessarily have the background on the rest.
Well, so in your estimation, then all the Bitcoin people that are screaming from the rooftop, "Got to buy Bitcoin! Got to buy Bitcoin! Got to buy Bitcoin! I don't care. I got enough Bitcoin." Are those people going to be left out in the cold when it's all said and done?
they are going to be left out in the cold. And there's something that's very frustrating about all of this. As I said, I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2012. And when you went to the early conferences about Bitcoin, what it was about people remembered the financial collapse in 2008, and they remember
which nobody went to. Nobody went to jail for. Reminder: 2008. Everybody thinks there's going to be some type of accountability, like Obama's going to go to jail, Anthony Fauci, so on and so forth. Nobody except for Bernie Madoff went to jail for 2008, and that was bank fraud at the highest level, and they didn't bring anybody to justice.
That's right. I mean, they showed that at the end of The Big Short, right? If you watch the movie The Big Short, nobody got penalized. The only people that got damaged by the 2008 financial collapse were the average Americans. And particularly if you're on the lower end of the spectrum, you got hurt the most. Everybody else got bailed out. And by the way, that's always what happens. And then they use it was a systemic threat and it would have been a lot worse and everything else. And it's just, peak moral hazard and peak everything else. So what was sorry, there was a question before that.
No, I said in regards to Bitcoin, because you and I both know these Bitcoin people. I'm seeing they're traveling all these conferences. They're like Bitcoin, decentralized. So they crack me up. I'll ask them. I say, okay, what if you'll appreciate this analogy? And somebody explained this to me, so I don't want to take credit for it. I came up with it on my own. But you remember Napster? I remember Napster. The whole idea of being able to share music. Right? And it crushed the record industry. CDs basically put them out of business. Well, they pivoted, they figured out a way, and they brought it back to Spotify and Apple where you're paying again for a subscription.
Yep.
Napster's gone. I was using LimeWire back but I never stole anything, Aaron. I just borrowed it in case, the record store burned down. They could borrow my copy of everything I downloaded.
Right.
But
of course, same.
All those things, are now gone, and people are back to paying for streaming. So I try to present this to people, but they're younger, so they don't understand the whole Napster model. But to me, this is what they're going to do with Bitcoin, right? They're going to centralize it and then incentivize people to use their version of it, which will leave all these people that are traveling all over the world and touting how great Bitcoin is, decentralized, yada, yada, yada. It's going to leave them all out in the cold. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is accurate. And what the frustrating thing about this is, I like to say that in the early days, people that were involved in Bitcoin looked at central bankers with disgust. And now it turns out it looks like they looked at them with envy and wanted to become them, because essentially the idea originally was this was money anyone, anywhere in the world could use if you were in the poorest country in the world, because 71% of the population of this planet makes less than $10 a day. So there was a real opportunity here to have sound money for the entire world. And that's the way people looked at it. And now it's just a new group of people that want to replace the pyramid, and they want to replace the hierarchy of, well, we want to be like Jamie Dimon, but there's still going to be a pyramid structure, and we're going to be at the top of it. And because we're at the top of it, we're okay. And this is all about freedom. It's not about economic freedom for the world. It's about personal economic freedom for them. And that is a big shift, by the way, in the ethos of what Bitcoin was all about. But what's important to understand is that Bitcoin was hijacked. It was hijacked around 2017, a period of time leading up to that. And so it went from being digital cash that you use for transactions to this whole notion of digital gold, where you buy Bitcoin and you never sell it, you never use it for anything. That's not what the white paper says. That's not the intention of Bitcoin. And it turns out the people that hijacked it, and there are a lot of players that were involved in this. There were some people from military and for the intelligence agencies that were involved in promoting and funding some of the changes that hobbled Bitcoin. There was a group out of MIT led by a guy by the name of Joy Ito, who not only funded changes to Bitcoin to make sure that it remained slow and expensive at only 7 transactions per second, which is not a replacement for cash or Visa or MasterCard, but his MIT group funded all 3 US CBDC pilots, and he received funding from Jeffrey Epstein for not only his work at MIT, but his work with his private venture capital fund that invested in Bitcoin-related ventures. So when I say it was hijacked, it was a massive hijacking, and it's a complete inverse of what it was supposed to be. So if you're new to Bitcoin post 2017, in my experience traveling around with my wife doing these workshops, I'll ask people, outside of Liberty space and crypto space, a lot of people don't know anything about Bitcoin, and most people have heard of Sam Bankman-Fried, but not Satoshi Nakamoto. And most people don't know that you could ever use Bitcoin to buy and sell things. They only think of it as a speculative asset. So people that got involved in this post 2017 have never been exposed to any of the historical information. And the guy who literally wrote the book Hijacking Bitcoin, who a friend of mine, Roger Ver, who is known as Bitcoin Jesus, because he was the first person in 2010, he fell in love with the idea, started taking out radio ads. He was the first ever investor in the Bitcoin ecosystem. There was no Silicon Valley or Wall Street. He invested in all of the early companies, exchanges, point of sale systems, and everything else. And he had a front row seat while Bitcoin was hijacked. He wrote a book called Hijacking Bitcoin and was arrested 3 weeks later in Spain, where he's been awaiting extradition, fighting extradition for over a year, where he is facing 109 years of made-up tax liability, which is all part of this Biden executive order. But I bring this up only to say that I've experienced this firsthand, that Bitcoin maxis, all of them, Michael Saylor, Max Kaiser, most of the developers, lead developers of Bitcoin, they've all blocked me on X. They will not allow for any public discussion about the hijacking of Bitcoin. And now this has infiltrated the administration. And so now we go from something that was freedom money that was going to replace government tyranny to now the United States government has or had 200,000 Bitcoin. Well, how did the US government get 200,000 Bitcoin? Did they mine the Bitcoin? Did they buy the Bitcoin on the open market? No. They stole the Bitcoin using civil asset forfeiture. So Ross Ulbricht's Bitcoin, my friend Ian Freeman, some of his Bitcoin are part of this 200,000 Bitcoin. Well, how were they able to do this? I thought Bitcoin was censorship resistant. I thought it was anonymous. This is another myth about this. It's the opposite of anonymous. It's a public ledger. There are thousands of copies of everybody's financial transactions. And so if you can identify one transaction because you used an exchange or one, any single transaction where you're identifiable, which by the way is anything involving a centralized exchange, then they can map out all of your transaction history. So then they're able to see and map out. There's a company called Chainalysis that works with law enforcement all over the world to do this. And they've been building a massive database of all of the Bitcoin transactions that have ever taken place. And they'll come to you. And so people will say, well, not my keys, not my coins. You can't take away my keys. It's censorship resistant. But if they come to you and say, hey, here's the evidence that these are your coins, we're either going to throw you in prison for the rest of your life, or you can turn the keys over. Well, it turns out I haven't found anybody yet that's actually said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison just for the principle of being able to hold on to my keys. So this is a real problem. So it's essentially at best, it's surveillance digital gold, and people aren't thinking about this. And if you know how civil asset forfeiture works, the government does this all the time. They'll pull you over for, some whatever they think is happening. They'll pull you over in your car. You have cash in your car. They'll take the cash and then they'll not give it back, which they can do under these civil asset forfeiture laws. So now moving forward, that the U.S. government has decided that a Bitcoin strategic reserve is in its national interest. Well, I can see a scenario where people get pulled over, and if you've got your wallet open on your phone, they'll seize your Bitcoin from there. I mean, that's not a far stretch given what's happened to date. But we've gotten to the point where Bitcoin went from freedom money that people were supposed to use from day-to-day transactions to fix and fight government tyranny and central bank tyranny, to some of the very same people. And by the way, they know better. It's not everybody. It's a pretty small group of people that know better, actively advocating for using taxpayer money to buy Bitcoin, actively advocating for civil asset forfeiture. I've seen people, given the situation that Roger's in, that are actually cheering on Roger going to prison because they would rather Roger go to prison for the rest of his life than have the truth come out about what happened with the hijacking of Bitcoin. So this is what's actually going on with Bitcoin, and it's absolutely disgusting. And new people literally have never been exposed to any of what I've just said because, again, the main people that would talk about it are not able to speak publicly.
And they even bringing up Napster, they have no idea what that is or what that time period was, and how it all went down and how the government took control of it. And I'm by no means a Bitcoin expert at all, but I believe if these governments across the world want to centralize it, they will do that. Like which they're well on their way, or maybe it's already done.
The elements of now, I am an advocate for crypto. I'm an advocate for privacy coins. I use something called Zano. I use something called Monero, because there are cryptocurrencies that have solved these problems. Because you can't view the transactions, so so the government can't actually see what's going on, even if they wanted to. And so there are some solutions to this. But Bitcoin has been hijacked and it has been centralized. So since it can be tracked. And there's another element, not to get too technical about it, but the way that Bitcoin uses what's called proof of work, where you have computers that are solving these math puzzles to determine which transactions get added to the block. And so increasingly, it's large companies that are doing the bulk of the mining, while these are large corporate entities that are regulated. And so now there are, I don't know, miners, big corporations that are mining these transactions that are complying with the Know Your Customer laws right out of the bat. So there are several different ways that the government can centralize and control Bitcoin. One, again, through civil asset forfeiture is a big one. Regulating the mining apparatus is another one. And so the fact that these transactions are public, the fact that there aren't many transactions at all because it's been artificially constrained to only do 7 transactions per second. This makes it easier to trace and track Bitcoin transactions. And the fact that it uses mining, which requires massive amounts of electricity. And there are other ways that crypto can happen without doing this mining. And I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this, but with what's going on now with AI, we're at a point right now where, the U.S. is going to lose the AI race, but at the same time, that's not stopping us from all of the energy that's being used in AI. Well, that energy that's being used for AI is going to compete with the energy that has to be used for Bitcoin mining. And if electricity prices surge because we're trying to, out of national security, catch up on the AI game, then it's not going to be competitive for the U.S. to mine Bitcoin either, which is going to be, another issue based on the propaganda that we're hearing out of the administration about the golden age and everything else.
Do you think that Peter Thiel and the whole tech bros, is that the new World Economic Forum or WEF 2.0? That's what I think of.
It is. And in fact, the way that I look at this is, yes, and they're far more effective. And the ideological basis for this, so people know about Yuval Noah Harari on the left, right? Like he's the Klaus Schwab. He's like the pseudo intellectual who influences the people on the left that Bill Gates talk about and Klaus Schwab talks about. And he's said things like the era of free will is over, and he's pushed a lot of these technocratic concepts from the left, and he's widely regarded on the left. Well, the right has their own version of Harari, and it's a guy by the name of Curtis Yarvin, and he's heavily influenced J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk. In fact, he consulted with Musk on the creation of America Party. And if you read Yarvin's work, he is pushing neo-monarchy. He's pushing the idea that democracy is bad, which I can understand that from some point. I mean, in terms of mob rule being bad, but what he's proposing is a reorganization where you essentially have a monarch or a CEO in charge. Both Harari and Yarvin get you to technocracy, and they're both hijacking kind of the right and the left dynamic so that you have people that think that they're on opposite sides. They're both pushing technocracy. Musk is a technocrat. Musk's grandfather was the head of the Canadian Technocracy Party. Musk has stated on X multiple times that Mars will be a technocracy. He's just because his grandfather was a technocrat doesn't mean he's a technocrat, but he's stated that he is for technocracy on Mars, and America's party platform is all about technocracy and the application of AI to the military and to government. And I saw a post last week from the America Party handle where it was something like, well, these bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. and career politicians have done a bad job. It's now time for engineers to come in and take control of things. And so what strikes me as what I'm frustrated about is libertarians that are supposed to be about freedom aren't seeing that technocracy and having engineers make decisions for people is not pro-freedom. It's actually the loss of free will. And that is essentially what's at stake here. Free will is at stake in this freedom versus technocracy battle, but no one's opposing it because the technocrats have already won based on the fact that they're controlling the right versus left dynamic. And Peter Thiel, and I would add more broadly, the PayPal mafia is the driving force. The PayPal mafia is the new WEF. And there are some interesting, a lot of people have discussed this. There's an image that you can find on Google of who is actually part of that original PayPal group. And, I won't go through all of them, but the three big ones are Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and David Sachs, who is the crypto AI czar for the US. So the technocrats control and own the Trump administration in terms of all of these big policy initiatives. It's not Trump coming up with any of these policies. It's these technocrats, and they've been very effective at it.
The George Soroses, Bill Gates, they are the past, in my view. They are old. They did what they needed to do. They served their purpose, but they are no longer. And when I hear people still referencing George Soros, I'm like, okay, you don't get it then. You don't get it, in my opinion, because first of all, he's like 94 years old. But this is the new era with these tech bros. And they're the ones ushering in these instruments to fully implement and get everyone to comply. And I don't see how you can stop it.
I think you can stop it. I think that you stop the way what I'm working on at Daylight Freedom, which is at daylightfreedom.org, which is the nonprofit my wife and I started, is three things. One is the exposing the technocratic takeover. So we have a fundamental issue is that people don't understand what technocracy is. People need to be made aware of that because, as I said, there are a lot of people confused and buying into this idea that, oh, well, technocracy is actually just technology. It's making government more efficient. No, it's an ideological movement. So making people aware there. The second part, and this is probably the most important of all, is we have to take our free will back. We are continuously giving up our free will. We're giving up our free will to external organizations, to white knights, increasingly to technology, to AI, to algorithms. We need to actually, literally unplug from the matrix, but recognize that we've all been programmed, right? Our entire life, whether it was before we were 7 or school or the media or whatever, we've all been programmed. Once you recognize that you've been programmed, you can kind of uninstall the programs, and then you can, watch out for and determine moving forward how you're going to live. Are you going to be making your own decisions and exercising your own agency? Or are you going to be controlled by AI algorithms and, whatever your white knight says? That's critical to defeating this. And then the third is building decentralized alternatives and private alternatives to what's going on from a technocratic perspective. So this is what I've been working on. I call it the revolution will be tokenized, which it will be tokenized, right? Whether people like it or not or understand it or not yet, tokenization is going to happen. All global assets will be tokenized and they will be traded in a digital form. The question that remains now, is it going to be a centralized form of tokenization controlled by the technocrats or a private version where you can trade your tokens without any knowledge of by third parties and without and actually retain the tokens in your own self-custody. So there's an opportunity here to recreate the world in a way where people have retained their sovereignty and free will, which is what I've been working on using this Zano blockchain. So it is possible, but honestly, the odds aren't great. And the most frustrating thing is that we've lost, I don't know how much time by the fact that people have been disarmed and are complacent about what's currently going on. If it was Klaus Schwab, if Harris had won and we were recommitting to more involvement with the UN and the WHO, and we were launching a CBDC centrally and so forth, there would be massive upheaval and people would be talking about it. As it stands right now, there aren't very many of us that are actually having the conversation that we're having right now at all. There are a lot of people within the crypto space and a lot of crypto publications. I did a podcast with the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus last week. And which is something that obviously should be aligned with what I'm talking about with respect to, the separation of money and state and everything. And in getting prepared for the podcast, they said they couldn't find any other articles. They went through pages and pages of doing research, and all they found were people saying positive things about stablecoins, including publications in the crypto space. So this is how big the challenge is that the propaganda war has been very effective by the people in traditional finance, by the Bitcoin bag holders that just want to continue to increase the price of Bitcoin, and by the politicians that have been co-opted by it all.
Well, and it proves my point, right? They took over MAGA because it's much easier now to move forward to implement their agenda, whether it been, the other side would have won. But, I wonder, you think it would have mattered who won that seat? Will we end up in the same place anyway?
I actually think and I would not have predicted this, but I think it's going to accelerate faster now. I think we have less time now. I think that it was going in the same direction no matter what, because look at Musk. Musk was a Democrat until it wasn't convenient for him to be a Democrat. And then he was a Republican for about 90 days. And now he's forming his own political party. Peter Thiel went in and out. He supported Trump, actually helped get Trump elected in 2016 using Palantir, which is a whole other conversation, but then held back in 2020, kind of wait and see. And then was heavily involved this time. Peter Thiel's the reason J.D. Vance is the vice president.
That's a whole other, Aaron, not to interrupt you, but that's a whole other, I've had discussions with people in regards to J.D. Vance. And, again, I told you I'm from Ohio. He changed his name, 4 times? He's changed his name 4 times. And I still have never gotten an answer. How do you meet Peter Thiel while you're at law school? Are you sitting in the food court and Peter Thiel walks by and then says, here, like the hand of God touches him and says, I see something special in you. You're going to make a difference. Let me help you write a book. Let me fund your venture capital group. Best-selling book, gets made into a movie. And also his best friend is Vivek Ramaswamy. One of his kids is named Vivek. None of that sounds strange to people.
Right out of central casting, right? Clearly, it's scripted. It's very clearly scripted. Even down to, and once Peter Thiel's a thing with Hulk Hogan and backing Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker because Peter Thiel didn't like the fact that he was outed as gay by Gawker. So you look at that Republican National Convention, you have Hulk Hogan up there tearing his shirt off. You have J.D. Vance, like that. All that is Peter Thiel, and it's all scripted. But I don't know if the one thing is I think that the Democrats and Harris would have been less competent, but in a way that would have made it somehow more difficult for the technocrats to implement things as quickly as they are. Trump is just easy to manipulate with flattery. And Trump kind of views it as, oh, well, my first term, I had a whole bunch of Beltway DC people and I got the wrong people in. So this time I'm going to only bring in billionaires to help me. So he gets to take the credit for the work of billionaires. He's not thinking about this ideologically. In the meantime, they're coming in and they've got to be laughing about what's going on with all of this behind the scenes. I think the PayPal mafia, because again, they're called the mafia because they still talk kind of behind the scenes and invest in things together and kind of push a strategy. So, this is a group that there's probably sitting there saying, oh, look, we're going to get them to fall for this. People joke about, MAGA falling for it again. Trump's falling for technocracy again. And it's very frustrating to watch. So we would be going in the same direction. We've been going in the direction towards technocracy actually since 1973 with the formation of the Trilateral Commission. Now we're on, a hyper accelerated pathway, and it's faster now under Trump than it was under Harris. And there's no opposition. So that's why I think our prospects are. We need a sense of urgency. We can stop this. We can be successful at it, but we can't be successful if we don't even identify what the problem is. And that's where we are right now, is disarmed.
Well, and there's also the notion, I've heard people say, well, civil war, there'll be a civil conflict, people will be up in arms. I don't see that. There might be some unrest, some kinetic battles that might take place, but who are you going to fight right now? You're going up against technology and technocracy. Okay, let's say you remove Jeff Bezos or Peter Thiel. It's a corporation. There's somebody else that's just going to step right in there and keep the plan moving forward.
And by the way, let's not forget, this isn't U.S. versus China. If I encourage people to go to YouTube and just type in China technology, China electric cars, and everything else. The Trilateral Commission is called the Trilateral Commission because it's North America, Europe, and Asia, right? So basically, the strategy of the Trilateral Commission for the last 50 years has been to infiltrate people at the top of government. So to the point where in Jimmy Carter's first administration, all but one member of his cabinet were members of the Trilateral Commission. Well, they've been doing this in all of the countries. So when people say, well, is there a global? Yes, they've actually been literally installing people at the highest level to advise governments for 50 years in 3 of the different power centers on Earth. So we're not competing against China. But if you got rid of Musk, I mean, I'm going to tell you something. Musk isn't leading in all. There are better electric cars in China. I mean, we may have a lead in satellites, but China's going to overtake us in AI. But again, they're not overtaking us. They're just pushing the technocratic plan from their side of it. So it doesn't matter who wins the elections. And it's not about U.S. versus China. Technocracy wins every time.
Well, and it comes back to what I was saying about my friend Matt Smith's article, which is titled, I pulled it up so I remember, DARPA's Theory of Mind Warfare, where they're looking at behaviors, centralizing, sharing of information to be able to predict or get ahead of predictive programming to anticipate behavior for adversaries. Well, we saw in 2020 who became the ultimate adversary? The people.
Yep. And we're already the adversary. Palantir's already using that predictive modeling for local law enforcement. And when you dig into Palantir, what they've been doing, they've stopped right-wing movements in Europe. They've been heavily involved in things in Gaza. They've been involved in things in Ukraine. They've been very effective at this. They're quite the powerhouse already at leveraging this information. And Trump has now just authorized them to create a database on Americans. People should be horrified. You should actually look at Palantir as being worse than Klaus Schwab because these guys are actually effective. The kinds of things that Schwab and Gates would talk about, these guys actually have the capacity to do. And the switch is that people are absolutely asleep at the switch. And we talk about propaganda. I mean, I've spent a lot of time studying propaganda from, Bernays and using Freudian techniques to convince people to, join World War I, to then realizing at peacetime you can use these same tactics to get people to buy products, to now it's being weaponized through algorithms. And no one more than Musk knows how you can use social media to manipulate people's limbic systems, to manipulate their dopamine, to use fear to drive changes in thoughts and actually changes in what's actually going on in your brain. I saw him give a talk about that prior to him even getting into this. And so he's going to be able to manipulate more people. So people are like, oh, well, we've defeated the mainstream media. Oh, we've stopped the censorship industrial complex. We are walking right into a much more powerful force, but because it's algorithmic and because it's subtle and because you can't see it as overtly, people are going to falsely think that they're free when they're actually walking directly into a digital prison.
And they don't even realize it. Would you say prison or digital slavery?
I said prison, but I mean either way.
Yeah.
And again, I'd argue we're already there. As I said, with the tax code and everything else, we're already there. Like we're the frog in the pot, and the frog's about to flatline. And we are so brainwashed that we actually believe we're the freest country in the world. And we believe we have free speech, that Elon saved free speech. Elon did not buy Twitter to save free speech. He bought Twitter because he always had the design of creating a WeChat everything app. And WeChat is one of the primary components of the Chinese social credit system. Like he stated it. There's a video. The thing that's the most frustrating about this is that, it's not like I'm telling conspiracy theories about technocracy or everything. These people are to the point where they say it publicly. They put it in writing. They never even retract it because they think that it doesn't matter and that people aren't going to stop it. And so far, they've actually been correct.
Well, it's just like the whole idea during COVID where the package on the mask, I remember looking at it and it said does not prevent COVID. It said it right on the bag of the mask. And I was trying to explain to people that had just got so caught up in the whirlwind. I'm like, look at this. no. They didn't even want to see it. And I'm like, oh my God, they just declared martial law in the United States, well, across the world, non-violently, and
Yep.
shut this country down. But yet people, and then when the quote unquote solution, the cure to, I don't want to say that word for YouTube, but people were rolling out, they were literally lined around buildings to get these shots, like a rock concert.
Yep.
And yet I said, and I still believe this, people will comply again. Okay, they won't fall for COVID, but to what you and I just spent 90 minutes talking about, people will literally comply again. I don't know what it will take. Something drastic is going to have to happen for the masses to be like, we need this. We need this. I need to be able to buy my lattes and go to yoga.
Yep.
What kind of event do you anticipate? What would trigger that type of response where people are going to be like, yeah, we need this?
I don't know, because I think so many people that I know are taking victory laps thinking that we stopped COVID, not realizing that COVID was just one bump that added more technocratic surveillance. So I feel like we're walking into, so given what people have just accepted with real ID and everything else, I'm not entirely sure at this point. And now with the technocrats actually controlling social media algorithmically, I'm not sure what would cause people to, the way that I've been approaching it is, like all technology or ideas, going after the innovators first, right? Technology and ideas they don't start mainstream. They go through a process, right? I mean, even, everybody didn't go out and buy electric cars. You had wealthy people buying the first electric cars, and then they figured out how to get the price, make it, more affordable, and make it, easier to use, and get some government subsidies and everything. And then it becomes more mainstream. We have to be the same with building the alternatives. And so this is where I think the way that it'll work is go to people that have already, that understand the tyranny directly. It should be people in the medical freedom movement. See, this is why I get discouraged, because the people in the medical freedom movement should be working on building these private decentralized systems, not advocating for their guy to use the force of the state to push their particular views, which is why this becomes challenging. But nevertheless, medical freedom, food freedom, build these decentralized marketplaces, work out the kinks, make them easier to use, so that when they go too far too fast in trying to push tyranny, you have to have a solution that when people look at it, because they're going to only be looking at this in a position of fear, right? In an emergency, where you can show them something where they can say, oh, okay, well, I do have an alternative. I will be able to eat. I will have access to healthcare. I can make money. There is an alternative parallel system here that I can use. And so I don't have to make this other decision, because how many people took the jab because they thought they needed to do it to keep their job? Well, as they keep on adding more and more of this technocracy and surveillance, and the longer people go without pursuing these parallel systems, the easier it's going to be for them to rationalize to themselves why they're moving into a pod, right? So this is the race. The race is to build as quickly as we can the decentralized systems and make them as easy to use as what's being offered by the technocrats. So when that emergency happens, what I worry about is they're accelerating faster. They're moving much more quickly than we are on the decentralized stuff by leaps and bounds.
Well, I also, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, that was it.
Well, I also think as individuals too, you have to ask yourself, all right, what am I willing to give up? What am I willing to sacrifice? If I'm not going to comply with the real ID, it might get to a point where I might not be able to fly, and that's okay. And people need to try, in my humble opinion, try to withdraw the best that they can, because you can't get fully off the grid. It's not possible in the United States. Not that I see, but you have to slowly, withdraw from the system the best way you can as an individual. And I also think too, if enough people start to do that, and as they keep putting all these workflows and processes and systems in place, hackers aren't going to stop. Eventually, the system could break.
Yeah, it could. I mean, certainly there are risks with all of this. So in my opinion, it's not a foregone conclusion that they're going to succeed. I think that this type of centralization has been, I mean, the Soviet Union tried this, China tried this with a great leap forward. It's not like this idea of centralization and having experts make decisions for everybody is new, and it's failed every time. The problem is this time it could wipe out humanity based on, you know, the fact that we now do have AI and some of these other surveillance systems. And I think one of the ways that the technocracy fails is because the people involved fight amongst themselves over who's going to control the technocracy. I mean, that is likely to turn out to be what brings it down. But again, once if you've centralized all of the assets on Earth in the process, and then you've enabled AI to do a whole bunch of stuff, well, what is that? What is the risk of that? What is the risk of that when Musk says, you know, number one priority is apply AI to the military? Well, what are the risks of that, right? I mean, this is a situation where hubris and ignorance could wipe out humanity when faced with the application of these very powerful technologies. And so I think they're going to destroy themselves, but possibly everybody else in the process. But at the same time, we still have to build these other decentralized alternatives. Again, it can happen, but what I'm trying to stress to everyone is that people have to understand what technocracy is and realize that so many people I talk to, even I was at an event this weekend, and people are like, well, you know, at least we now have breathing room. We do not have breathing room. We have less breathing room. And so people that are like taking a step back, a sigh of relief, feeling like we got a victory, completely disarmed. And that's why we will not be successful so long as people don't recognize that we have an active threat that's accelerating. And right now, that would be the way I would describe the situation.
Do you think there's a civil war at the elite level right now taking place?
Not yet. I don't think there is one going on right now at the elite level. There will be. That will turn out to be the case. But I mean, you know, I'm not seeing it happen. You have, you know, Soros is, like you said, Soros is old. And the thing is, I think the PayPal mafia for right now is aligned. So if you have Musk and Thiel and Sachs and all of these other guys, kind of it makes you wonder how long they've been working on this. I mean, I can see this as being something that was hatched 20 years ago. So I don't think they're fighting. I've seen no indication that they're fighting amongst themselves. I think it's very possible that they could fight amongst themselves. And there may be a debate between whoever controls the Chinese technocracy and the Chinese wing of the technocracy versus US. But even when I say that, you know, when I watch Elon wrap himself in the flag, you know, you can even use Grok to find out what Musk's own investments are in China. I mean, he's trying to make himself out to be a patriot. Look at the amount of business that he does in China. It's a joke that China is the enemy. These people are collaborating. What I would like to know more is how closely the technocrats in China are working with the technocrats in the U.S. because they are. And the question is, to what degree is even that coordinated? I mean, even if you look at, you know, COVID, I mean, to what, like this idea that, oh yes, China's our enemy. So why are we doing bioweapons research with them? Does that make sense? Is that something that you do with your mortal enemy? Bioweapons research? So anyway, hopefully I don't get you kicked off of YouTube. I'm trying to be somewhat cautious, although it's, you know,
no, it's okay.
Hard to do on these topics.
I was just gonna, you know, kind of. I know we've been talking for a while. You know, Elon, the people that were buying into this whole superhero Tony Stark Marvel movie, I'm like, all right, you know, he is bound to the federal government. He made his money off the federal government. There are certain rules you have to play by when you are receiving that much federal funding. He is not a patriot. This is not a superhero movie. Yeah. The whole, even like with Obama getting arrested, you know, Tulsi Gabbard, and she's uncovering all these things with Russiagate, and it's like she's taking her orders from somebody. Like, this is not. Nobody's getting arrested on that level. This is not a superhero movie.
No, Tulsi already. I mean, I was very pessimistic about Tulsi from day one, but I mean, she already gave up on wiretapping and then flipped her position on Iran. What a rug pull! And by the way, her background is WEF and worked in military psyop programs. I mean, are we really buying this? What? Because she has a streak in her hair? Like, it's just insane what's going on here. But I think we're at a point where people have been rug pulled so many times in a row that facing the fact that they consented to this and actually rooted this on is more difficult. Or was it Twain or somebody who says it's easier to fool someone than convince them they've been fooled? I don't know if it was Twain, but it seems like something he would say. Well, I think we're at the point right now where if you thought that the white knight that was going to save Western civilization is the guy that pushed Operation Warp Speed, if you somehow convinced yourself of that, I mean, think about what people were convinced of. Remember during 2020 when people were convinced and rooting for this idea that military intelligence was going to come in, implement martial law, have 10 days of darkness, round up all the pedophiles, have military tribunals, and execute them over closed caption TV? People not only believed that, they advocated for it. The level of propaganda is so intense that they've convinced people that it's patriotic to implement martial law. This is a very frightening proposition, but I think the longer this goes on, the more unwilling people are going to be to admit the fact that, hey, you know what? It was never 3D chess the first time. We never got 3D chess round one, and now there's no 3D chess. And it's embarrassing to admit to yourself. I mean, I've actually talked to some people. I know some people that believe the Q stuff, and they're now deeply ashamed of it. But not everyone, because I still see this stuff.
I just had somebody yesterday, Aaron, say to me about Q, this is part of the plan. Literally yesterday. I go, and I never read Q or anything. And I said, really? We're going back to this? Like, really? Like, we're still talking about this? You have to take, and then he's a friend of mine, but he's like, man, you're really down today. I'm like, I'm not down. I'm just trying to be objective and to come to terms with where we really are. And there's nobody coming to save you. And I think I also find it funny on the right side of the media, Charlie Kirk comes to mind, where he was talking about, I trust Pam Bondi, I trust Kash Patel, I trust Dan Bongino. They're my friends. Okay, yeah. Well, you trust the government? He goes, well, I didn't say I trusted the government. Well, you did. Yeah. Like you did. Like.
No, he did. He said, I trust my friends. I saw that as well. And it's just, how many times is this going to, and this is why I go back to, we have to reclaim our free will, because until we make 30,000 decisions every day, until we're exercising our own direct control over our own decisions, our own thoughts, our own emotions, none of the rest of this matters. And it seems like people are digging in even deeper. Well, yeah, okay, Trump 1 didn't work out, Trump 2 didn't work out, but you know what? Now Elon's going to be the savior. And every minute we do that, it's less time that's been spent reclaiming our free will and building alternative solutions. And so what frustrates me, I'm involved with a lot of different events and organizations and people, and I've seen a lot of people that should know better buy into some of the political solution aspects of this. And then even when confronted with what's actually going on, they're still not willing to move outside of the political side. And I spent 20 years close to politics. I've got to run soon because I have to pick up my daughter at dance. But I will say this. So my stepmother was heavily involved in Republican politics going back to 1992, started out at low level in Florida in the Republican Party, ended up the national committee woman, then ended up the co-chair of the entire RNC from 2012 to 2016 and was Trump's ambassador to Costa Rica. So I've seen how that party works and how politics works close up, in addition to my own 15 years of political activism. And what I've tried to convince people of, you can't, America 1.0 is over. You have a population where 2/3 of Americans can't identify the 3 branches of government, where only 27% of 8th graders pass a civics test, where the parties determine who the candidates are. It's not an actual, like, obviously look at the Democrats and Bernie Sanders and RFK and how, kind of the choices that you are presented with aren't actually choices. Then the elections themselves are largely controlled by AI and data at the level of the party. So the reason the Democrats were successful from, after 2008 is that Obama brought in people that actually spent a lot of time on technology and starting to implement AI. Trump won, in my opinion, in 2016, in part due to the help of Palantir. But the thing is, the targeting, and I'm telling you this as somebody who ran a super PAC here in New Hampshire. I licensed a database from a company called Labels and List. I had 500 data points on every voter. I could tell you their net worth, what magazine subscriptions they have, where they're likely to stand on 10 different issues on a scale from 0 to 100, all of it. And so the parties use this to manipulate and propagandize the elections. I used to joke, there's a statement that the New York Attorney General could indict a ham sandwich. I think you could elect a ham sandwich because it's all controlled at the get out the vote level by all this other stuff. So this isn't an election. There's no choice. There's no constitutional republic or representative democracy or any of that. This has all been completely captured, and we can't vote our way out. But I've had a hard time making that case. People still want to believe, but it's an unwinnable proposition at this point. And there's been no nation or empire that's gotten to the state that we've gotten at that's actually righted the ship. It collapses, and there's certainly, we don't have any improved moral character or ethics or anything like that here. And so we got to get people out of even that. Like, nobody's going to save us, but the apparatus of government is also not the right battleground to win this. We're actually fighting technocrats, and people think that we're, jockeying. We're going to, win from within government, which is essentially operating like a mafia organization at this point. But, with that said, I should probably get going.
Where can people find you, Aaron?
You can find me at daylightfreedom.org, and you can find me on X at Aaron R. Day.
Aaron, I enjoyed this conversation. I'd love to have you back on. And God knows there's going to be lots to talk about here. So thank you so much for doing this. And I look forward to continuing to follow your work.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well. Love to come back.
Mic drop.